So no, I think my only response to that is round objects. So who's next?
Yeah. So continuing this. So say alcohol is also very dangerous to society as a whole and for individuals taking it. And I guess it's important that the laws are consistent in the sense that people feel that they prosecuted similar ways for similar things. So as long as it's completely legal to drink alcohol and buy it, how can you explain to people that like smoking parties now should be prosecuted and not be?
Well, it's incredibly easy. All you need to do is think. I recommend to you. Alcohol has been legal for not just centuries, but millennia, and in mass use. It's not practical to ban it. People have tried. The Americans didn't try very hard. It's the prohibition is a myth. I think there were about 72 officers in the entire 48 states charged with enforcing alcohol prohibition laws, and the possession of alcohol wasn't banned, and they had 2 long unguarded coastlines, and they had 2 long unguarded borders with countries where alcohol was legal, and they had huge unpatrolled interior spaces. So what did you expect? But in Iran, where they really take it seriously, and which is a police state, where they can fling you in jail and leave you there to rot, in Iran they've been trying to stamp out alcohol since 1979, and they have completely failed, because before they did so it had been legal for ages and people wouldn't accept the law against it. You can't ban alcohol now any more than you can ban cigarettes. It would be nice. In my view, if we knew what we know about alcohol now, and it were being introduced now, it had the same level of use as marijuana does, you could and should ban it. But those conditions aren't true. Law has to be, to some extent, practicable. I am very much in favour of the 1915 licensing laws in this country, which in my childhood and teenage years greatly controlled the disastrous level of drinking which has come about since the Tory government very mistakenly destroyed those laws in the 1980s, and New Labour then jumped up and down on them and wiped them out in the 1990s. But I would like to bring them back. Whenever anybody asks me, I say bring them back. But it is not and cannot be an argument for the legalization of an existing dangerous poison which is illegal to say we've already got 2 disastrous illegal poisons in our society, let's legalize another one. It doesn't make sense. So thinking is the antidote to your question, and I recommend it to you. Who's next? Yes, please.
Other than taxation, what do you think especially conservative politicians' motivation behind their push for this is? And
what is apart from greed for taxation?
Apart from greed,
what is
that idea?
It's very it's stupidity. I have over many years. I used to work in this building. I was a lobby correspondent. I've worked in 57 countries. I have some experience of the exercise of power, and I cannot tell you how convinced I've become over the years with the very, very large role which stupidity plays in human affairs. And when you've got the Tory party involved, then it plays probably rather larger role. So I think that has a lot to do with it. These people are simply not very bright, and they're not very well informed. And the other thing, they don't want to be informed. If you try to inform them, you can hear the sound of one, it's like the sound of one hand clapping, the sound of one mind shutting. They don't want to know because they've already decided. They think there are quite serious numbers now of people in the Tory party who think if they get down with the kids enough, if they're LGBT enough, if they're all the other things enough, that they can survive as a political party. I think they're mistaken, but that is what they think. And this is one of the things they think will actually save them from nemesis at the hands of the voters, which otherwise looms. I'm not saying people like me, because I wouldn't dream of voting Tory, but a lot of people my age do. People of my generation, when we all die, where are they going to find anybody to vote for them? Presumably among marijuana smokers. That's what they think, right? That is what is behind it. It is stupid, but it is stupidity is also very tenacious. Just to add something.
Do you think there's any chance that they won't pass it now, or is it a lost cause?
I have no. This is up to you. I can only tell you that we are about to do something amazingly foolish and dangerous, which everybody will regret profoundly for the rest of their lives once they find out what they've done. Which is the law of unintended consequences is the law most frequently passed in this building, and they're very good at it. And I'm just saying, here you are. You're all presumably interested in politics and active in it, and might do something about it while you can. This is all I can do. I can't. I was banned from the Today programme because I was once rude to the sainted Professor Nussel. And I'm not allowed. If the British Association of Ping Pong Ball Manufacturers brings out a supposed report calling for the decriminalisation of cannabis, it will leave the BBC Today programme the following morning. If you say anything in the other direction, you won't get on. And so here I am, I'm taking advantage of the very kind offer of Mr. Harris Quinn to come and speak to a larger audience than my cat. My cat is bored with me going on. You may well be too, but here you are. You can't get out easily.
I think you may have a larger audience than your cat, generally, Peter. You're very modest.
I sometimes doubt it.
But
I think, let me take another question. Good.
Do you agree that the current physical measures that take place today for cannabis are not adequate? Over recent years, the law enforcers become way more lax in offences. The legislation states that you can have up to 5 years in prison and an unlimited fine, or both, but practically this is enforced. Would you take it a step further by saying that further legislation should be in place to prevent increasing usage?
Well, if the existing legislation, which I don't believe was ever seriously meant to be enforced, but if it were enforced, in an intelligent way, I think this is, people say, oh, you want to sling everybody in prison. I've visited lots of prisons. I think they're horrible places. I don't want to sling or indeed place anybody in one ever if they can possibly avoid it. But on the other hand, I remember very well that enforcement works. You're all too young to know, but in the late 1960s in this country, it was still possible to climb into a powerful car when you were drunk and drive it home from the bar. And nothing much would happen to you if you were caught. If you killed somebody, then something might happen to you, that probably not much, and the fact that you were drunk wouldn't have much effect on it because there was no evidence that could be brought forward that you were drunk. Then they invented the breathalyzer. And in a few short months, in 1967, the police, by enforcing the laws against drunk driving, completely changed this country from one where thousands of people merrily got into their cars and drove around, killing themselves and other people in a sort of mechanized steel and rubber massacre. It stopped because the law was enforced. And all you need to do with the law against cannabis is this. Someone is caught in possession of cannabis, and it's very easy to prove because of the chemical measurement. You say to them, right, this is caution. And when we say caution, we don't mean what we used to mean, which is nothing. We mean, we've told you not to break this law again. And if you break this law again, you will go to prison. And when you come out of prison, you'll never be able to travel to the United States again, or lots of other countries, because it will be on your record. So just don't do it again. And if anybody then did do it again, they would go to prison. Not many would, but if they insisted on taking that risk, then we have to accept their desire to go to prison, and they would be examples to anybody who was feeling to think differently. And within a year, the number of people prepared to risk their liberty, their livelihoods, their freedom to travel for a spliff would diminish to very, very small numbers. People say, where has this ever worked? Well, it worked in Britain actually quite well before 1967 when the law was seriously enforced. And it works now, although the Home Office is very reluctant to admit it and puts it down in a rather racialist fashion to cultural differences. It works now in Japan, and it works now in South Korea. And in both cases, the laws for Japan had a very serious drug problem after the war, mainly of amphetamines. And it introduced extremely strict laws on possession, which it has enforced ever since. And if you are caught in possession of drugs in Japan, quite serious things happen to you, likewise in South Korea. And as a result, or possibly not as a result, maybe it's a post hoc, propter hoc fallacy, but certainly there is less drug abuse in both those countries than there is in any comparable Western country. And these are civilized, law-governed, free countries. With, we're not talking about Duterte machine gunning people in the woods. We're not talking about Singapore, which has no proper rule of law or liberty. We're talking about free law-governed countries enforcing a serious law and thereby deterring people from doing something stupid. And we could do it very easily. It's not difficult to do. And people say, well, it's a cultural change. Cultural changes follow law. If you wanted to do it, you can do it. It's not at all difficult. It's just you need to have the will and the confidence and the belief to do it. And who in our modern political system has any will or confidence or indeed desire to do anything apart from advance their own political careers. You tell me, I don't know. But it's not difficult, nor is it savage, barbaric, or oppressive, nor is it a threat to human freedom. The liberties, the principal liberties of the human society are the liberties of speech, thought, and assembly. They are reinforced by Magna Carta, by the habeas corpus laws, by the presumption of innocence, and by the Bill of Rights. The freedom to stupefy yourself is not one of those freedoms, it is the opposite. Anybody who really wanted to run a dictatorship or a despotism would welcome a drug society. And it is amazing that people advance the freedom to stupefy themselves as one of the great freedoms of life. It simply is not. So we could enforce the laws if we wanted to. They are there, they exist. Parliament needs to do nothing. It's just the Home Office and the Justice Department. Shame on us for having a Justice Department. We have one. The Home Office and the Justice Department and the National Police Chiefs Council could, if they wished, enforce that law, and they could transform the country as quickly as it was transformed when the breathalyzer was introduced. Next. Yes?
Considering the current level of overcrowding in British prisons, is it really practical to make it an imprisonable offence?
Well, it's a lovely argument, and I didn't come here to discuss prisons and my thoughts on crime, but you can read them all in a very fine book called The Abolition of Liberty, which is, again, still available from any good library. One of the things it points out is the great paradox of British law enforcement, which is that the softer we are in law enforcement, the fuller the prisons get. What we do, to be very simple about this, what we do is we wait until someone has committed probably 30 crimes, many of which are completely unrecorded by an absent police force, until eventually we become exasperated, and after years and years of ignored cautions, unpaid fines, undone community service, unenforced, unactivated suspended sentences, eventually, by the time the person really is a hardened criminal and a complete recidivist, we put him in prison. And two things happen. One, therefore we have lots of people in prison. Secondly, people see from this that we're not serious about punishing crime, and so there are more criminals. And so the number of people committing crimes increases, so the number of people destined eventually to find their way into our overcrowded prisons grows year by year. If instead of this, people encounter prison on their second offence, the prisons would be as they were until the early 1960s, far, far, far emptier, and we could control them. The other thing that's wrong with our prisons is that we've largely ceded control of them to the inmates, and we have allowed, for reasons which one can only guess at, but we have certainly allowed far more than we ever needed to, the sale and use of illegal drugs in them. That could and should be stopped under a proper and indeed orderly prison regime. And for heaven's sake, what could be worse for an innocent person than to be in a prison run by the prisoners? But that is what happens at the moment. And that is what we condemn people to. It's a badly needed reform. It's a connected subject, and I haven't come here to talk about it, but I do have an answer to it, and you can read my book on the subject if you want the full answer. But I think people mainly want to talk about marijuana here, so I'll move on to another question.
If I may just very briefly, you mentioned what you saw as the necessary enforcement of the law to users of cannabis. What about those who grow, import, distribute cannabis?
Well, I've never quite seen the distinction between the two crimes. I've always found transubstantiation quite a tough subject when we were discussing the Reformation in history. It's difficult to work out exactly what they're driving at. But compared with transubstantiation, the law's attitude towards the consumption and possession of drugs compared with its attitude towards the sale and production of them is impossible to understand. And why is it that we make the drug illegal? What is it that resides in the drug that makes us make it illegal? Is it when it is inert that it's bad? No, it's when it's being used. Therefore, the person who's using it, and indeed the person who is the whole heart of the drugs, of the whole drug criminal network, the root and absolute foundation of the whole drug crime network throughout the world, is the buyer and user. Without him and his money, there would be no cartels, no traders, no nothing. It wouldn't exist. And yet, we say, if you're a dealer, you're an evil dealer. But if you're a buyer and user, you need help. And I can't understand this. I'm perfectly happy to continue prosecuting evil dealers and growers and all the rest of it. That suits me fine. The more of it, the better for me. But it makes no sense if you don't prosecute the users and buyers as well. It just simply does not make any sense as a policy. And also, there's a simple fact. You will never, ever reduce the consumption of anything by trying to deter supply without also interdicting demand. It's a simple practical point.
We have a situation where for 13, 14, 15-year-olds, cannabis is easier to obtain than alcohol.
Who says?
Well, that's what the statistics
Who says?
suggest.
Well, where are these statistics? It's something that people always say. Actually, you could go. I go to Birkenhead, as I did a couple of years ago, I can tell you, in the parks of Birkenhead. In the morning, round about not soon after breakfast time, you can find children of 12 or 13 swinging from litre bottles of vodka. It's easy to get alcohol in this country underage. It's very easy to get.
So you don't.
I don't know how you can make it. What possible measure you could use to say alcohol is sold in supermarkets in cut prices in huge quantities, and people buy it and they supply it. It's not easier. I mean, it is appallingly easy to get illegal drugs, but I don't think. I think that's just something that the drug legalizers make up as part of their propaganda. There's no testable evidence for it. How would you prove it? Who has done the work?
Well, from what I understand, a lot of schools have reported confiscating cannabis.
Well, you're not going to bring a bottle of vodka into school, are you? But, not these days.
It would suggest that there's that level of supply, and obviously you can't really prosecute 13-year-olds. So do you not?
Well, I don't know why not.
So you would prosecute?
Yeah, I think once people have reached the age of understanding that, yes, you obviously prosecute them differently from people who are older, but yes, of course you prosecute 13-year-olds. Yes, you're doing the choosing, isn't it? Yes, please.
We sort of about the political establishment and its greed, the media establishment, and the sort of self-interest. Why do you think that the educational class and that establishment followed suit in the marijuana debate?
Well, the education system is full of people from my generation, people who went to universities, and in those days colleges of education as well, in the late 1960s and early 1970s, when we were all more or less revolutionists of one kind or another. And most of them have never grown up. And that's where they went to work. And this is one of the big problems with this country. The huge numbers of people in those years were infected with these ideas. The other thing was that the marijuana was very common. It was a sort of holy communion rite of the new world. The shared joint passed around. It was, when I was at the University of York in the early 1970s, it was said that Harriet Harman and I were the only people there who didn't smoke dope. I wouldn't be at all surprised if this wasn't more or less true. If I go to universities now, certainly the first question I ask, because it deals with the stern prohibition claim, is I ask everybody in the room who's taken illegal drugs to put their hands up, and 98% of them do. And I think we'll probably be more or less the same in 1970, except that the universities in 1970 were much smaller than they are now. But the long march through the institutions by people of generally fairly incoherently left-wing views began in the 1970s and it continues. And they're there. And their successes aren't, seems to me, proven to be much of an improvement. It's a pity, but it's all part of the cultural revolution we've been through. I was amazed the other day, I have to throw this in because so many people didn't notice it. Peter Hennessy interviewed the Blair creature on Radio 4. And it was what you might call a soft-hitting interview, but don't knock it, because many people have tried hard-hitting interviews with Blair thing, and it doesn't work because he's impervious. But Hennessy got out of it the fact that he was himself a member of a Trotskyist organisation while he was in Oxford, which I would have thought was front-page news, but nobody paid blind notice. It's everywhere. I used to be a Trotskyist, but I'm open about it, and I stopped being one. But I look around the British establishment now, there's an awful lot of people who used to be Trotskyists and more or less still are, and they don't talk about it, and that's why they don't talk about it. Anyway, there must be another question. Yes, please.
Why do you think the medical establishment has been so quiet about the link between cannabis and drugs?
Well, they're not being quiet. If you read, I summed it up. Professor Sir Robert Murray, the most distinguished psychiatrist in the country, and lots of other people too, are quite open about the problem. And just look at Patrick Patrick Coburn in The Independent the other day did a very interesting article about this precise point and interviewed several psychiatrists about the problems they have. Here we are. He quoted Dr. Humphrey Needham Bennett, medical director and consultant psychiatrist of Signet Hospital in Sevenoaks. He said, among his patients, cannabis use is so common that I assume that people use or used it. It's quite surprising when people say, no, I don't use drugs. The connection between schizophrenia and cannabis is long suspected by specialists, but it retained its reputation as a relatively benign drug for some time. But it's only really quite recently that, and then he quotes Zerin Atakan, formerly head of the National Psychosis Unit at the Maudsley Psychiatric Hospital, and now a researcher at the Institute of Psychiatry. I got interested in cannabis because I was working in the 1980s in an intensive care unit where my patients would be fine after we got them well. We'd give them leave, and they'd celebrate their newfound freedom with a joint, and come back psychotic a few hours later. Plenty of them will talk about it if you ask them. The problem is, who's asking? I'm asking. Melanie Phillips is asking, but you can find a dozen writers on the Times and the Telegraph, and probably about 300 on the Guardian, who are always asking the other question. And the BBC never asks that question, because the BBC is shocking. I know there's nobody at the BBC takes drugs. It can't be to do with that. It's a completely drug-free organisation. But there is no sign ever of the BBC ever taking seriously the dangers of marijuana, and they never give prominence to this danger. They're completely in the hands of the big billionaire big dope lobby, and almost every time they run a story about it, it's a favourable one. No, if it's not the National Pig Ball Manufacturers, it's the British Tiddlywinks League. Somebody has come. It's a report. It's not a report. It's usually just a little document with about 5 pages of nothing described as a report, but it calls for cannabis decriminalisation or legalisation, so it leads to the Today programme or Newsnight. And maybe if you're lucky, if you're me, you get asked on. And the presenter says, are you seriously suggesting, Peter Hitchens, that you're any dangerous? Where was I? Yes, please.
Yes, my question about the capacity to stop it. So I was recently a student, just graduated, and I think the idea of someone meeting someone in a back alley to get drugs is perhaps out of date now. When someone wanted drugs, what they could do, they could just order it online, the darknet, pages, whatever. You could have it ordered and the college borders would handle it, blah, 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 and you'd get it. You wouldn't even have to go for any sort of checks. So to stop it, wouldn't we need a much larger state apparatus? Does liberalism even provide that? Because obviously we have to adopt the internet, perhaps becoming like perhaps People's Republic or something like that, in order to stop this benevolent drug use, which I absolutely agree is.
Can I use a horrible word? People who are familiar with what police actually do when they're policing, which I agree the police don't do much anymore, but they could do it if they wanted to. It's not a nice word, but if you know how police work actually happens, you'll be familiar with it. It's the word informer. And if once any crime is seriously prosecuted, and once it's worthwhile the police arresting and prosecuting, once it's worthwhile the CPS prosecuting, and once it's worthwhile magistrates hearing the case, it's amazing how quickly it becomes worthwhile having informants to collect evidence against the people you want to prosecute, and it's amazing how many of them then appear. And it's not nice, but the position very rapidly once the law was being properly enforced, that there would be lots of informers, and you would never know whether the person you were talking to on the dark web was really selling you marijuana, or whether he was really working for the police. And you would never know whether the person in the dark alley, if you choose that method, or the person in your office, or the person in your pub, or whoever it is, or your supposed mate, you would never know who they were working for. And so it would be dangerous. And that's the whole point. Breaking the law ought to be dangerous. It's a sad thing. I mean, there is an important point here. All crime is caused by law. If we didn't bother classifying anything as a crime, we wouldn't have to have these tedious police forces and courts and prisons. It would be completely unnecessary. We have laws, though, because some things do so much harm that we have to take action against them. I think marijuana is in that category. I think if we let it loose in our society, it would destroy us. I think it would drag us into the third world. And I think it would make it a very, very much more miserable country than it already is. I think we should do something better. If people aren't afraid of breaking the law, then the law isn't being enforced. And there are unpleasant aspects to it, which we have to admit. I don't like the sound of the word informer. But we're not talking about informing on somebody for saying something politically incorrect, which is actually quite common these days. We're talking about informing on somebody for breaking the criminal law, which seems to be perfectly acceptable. Criminal law made by a free parliament in a free country. Yes?
So, on one hand, you say don't have the freedom to stupefy ourselves, which is what you said. But on the other hand, we can't make alcohol illegal because of history. So which one is it? Because they seem completely inconsistent.
Did you listen to what I said at all? Fantastic. Try a bit harder this time. We'll do it again, slowly and with shorter words. We cannot ban alcohol. It is not practical. Marijuana, you haven't finished. You have to keep waiting. Marijuana is still illegal. It doesn't have to be made illegal. It is still illegal. What is going on is a campaign to destroy. Why are you shaking your head? Is it too hard? If you want me to go slower, I will, but all these things seem to be quite clear. We can't, marijuana is illegal. There is a campaign, people say, but why do you want to make sugar illegal? I might want to make sugar illegal, but it's not the point, is it? It isn't illegal, and no one's trying to legalize it. If it was illegal, I might very well be in favor of keeping it illegal, but it's not. Alcohol cannot be made illegal. It's not practical. Because I explained because once people have got used to something being legal for thousands of years, they don't accept it being made illegal. And I explained also, I gave the example of the Islamic Republic of Iran, a savage despotism, one which recently imprisoned a friend of mine in solitary confinement and almost destroyed him, a horrible place, capable of hurling at people who break its laws the most terrifying punishments. And they cannot, even under those circumstances, they cannot reimpose the ban on alcohol. So how are we going to do it? Tell me, if you're so clever.
No, I actually agree with what you're arguing.
Oh, good.
I don't like how you sort of go back and forth between...
There's no back and forth, there is no contradiction. My position is that we should have as tight restrictions on alcohol sale as we possibly could. I referred to the 1915 licensing laws. Do you know what they meant? No, exactly, but you're still prepared to judge my position on the basis of it's ignorant. What they meant was that the pubs were open on weekdays, I think from 10 o'clock in the morning till 2 in the afternoon, and then they shut. And then they opened again at 6 in the evening, and then they shut at 10:30. Otherwise they were not open. Alcohol could only be sold outside pubs in a very small number of off licenses, not sold as supermarkets, not available, couldn't get it. On Sundays, the hours were even shorter. And as a result of that, the amount of drinking in this country was enormously diminished. The Scandinavian countries introduced similar laws to discourage it because they have a very serious alcohol problem, and they have successfully reduced the amount of drinking. When that law was abolished by the Conservatives in the 1980s, the amount of drinking and the amount of drunkenness, the amount of wife beating, all the horrible things which accompany widespread alcohol use, the terrible consequences in many cases, domestically, which accompany increased enormously. And you have to ask yourself why a Conservative government, which of course has no interest in, well, let's not say that, we have to ask yourself why a Conservative government might have made it easier to sell lots of alcohol to people. I have no idea. But the fact is, we had such a restriction, and it could be reimposed, and I'm in favour of reimposing it. I think it's as far as we can go. There is no contradiction between that and wanting to maintain the laws against marijuana which exist and to enforce them.
Can I say one other thing?
I don't know. Will it be coherent? Is what
I believe so. So, because you said alcohol has been used for 1,000 years, well, cannabis has also been used.
Not in mass use. You don't listen to what I say. Marijuana has not been either legal or in mass use. I'm very careful about what I say, which you're not. Marijuana has not been legal or in mass use for thousands of years. Alcohol has been. That is the distinction between them. Legal and in mass use. There's only, I think, one word in that phrase which has more than one syllable. Legal and in mass use. How hard is it? How hard can it be to grasp what I'm saying? Next, please. You.
I can tell you why the Conservatives loosened up the licensing laws, because it increased the tax take enormously. And the same thing, I suspect, with legalisation of marijuana. You'll tax it. Think of the untold millions pouring into the exchequer. It's very simple and straightforward. There's no morality in it at all. It's all about money.
You said it.
I would disagree. So I think this time the Conservative Party's plays to the youth vote as opposed to the exchequer, and my concern is that there is this strain in the mainstream media that the Conservative Party must do something to call young voters, not realising that the largest and fastest growing demographic are actually the over 50s, which the Conservative Party seems to consistently wish to annoy and demotivate as voters. So
perhaps they're hoping that the over 50s will all become so desperate that they'll decide to get stoned and give up on everything. That's another part of their dark and deep plan.
But I think that's what's driving it. It's the getting down with the youth.
I suspect the money's there as well. A combination of both.
Okay, I think you're right. I think there's never only one explanation for anything. Yes, please.
Even though the PR campaign launched by Vico has been so successful, do you think there's any argument in using new legislation to fall damage control?
Well, you have to be more specific.
What would you say to try and legalise it, but with specific criteria to limit sale and strength and so on?
Well, this is often put forward, the idea that if you legalise marijuana, you can regulate it, and everything would therefore be okay. I mean, interesting. I was sent an article from a pro-legalisation publication in the United States, which pointed out that what actually happened in Colorado when they tried to reduce the strength. And here we are. Here we are quoting Andy Williams, CEO of Medical Man Denver. His operation produces strains like Screaming Gorilla, brand name, which you'll have to get used to, which carries 28% THC. He argued when an attempt was made to introduce a lower THC limit, tetrahydrocannabinol, the principal ingredient of marijuana, the acid one. He believes that if THC limits were imposed, it would help to fuel the black market. And this is the thing people don't understand. In this country, of course, cigarettes and alcohol are legal. They're legally sold and they're taxed. They're also the principal problem of Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, because huge numbers of cigarettes and huge amounts of alcohol are either smuggled or illegally manufactured in this country in an attempt to evade tax. And with marijuana, as soon as the tax is imposed in jurisdictions where it's legal, the legal sellers are undercut by the illegal sellers, who can, of course, bring it in at much lower prices. And indeed, if attempts are made to regulate the strength, then the illegal sellers will sell at a higher strength. And the reason why the strength is high is not because it's been forced illegally. What people who want marijuana want is they want to get stoned. And they want strong marijuana. The reason why skunk has become so widespread is because that's what people want. If people really didn't want it, it wouldn't actually be such a successful marketing operation in this country. Probably our most successful agricultural business, cannabis farming, not least because it's so free of tax. But the strength goes up because that's what the users want. And if the legal sellers are denied the ability to sell it at high strengths, then they will be undercut and outsold by the illegal sellers, and they will use that as argument with the government to allow them to sell higher strengths, which they will do. Higher and higher strength alcohol is sold in this country as well. I think now strengths which would have been illegal 30 years ago, absinthe and things like that, and the strength of wine and beer has definitely been going up over the past few years, driven by demand. And it's not possible, once something is legal and general sale, to keep down these levels. Regulation is a myth. Regulation is a euphemism for legalization, designed to fool the naive, I'm afraid. Anybody else? Yes, please.
Do you have a blanket view of drugs, or do you take drugs by case basis?
I have a blanket view of drugs, but I am a Puritan and proud of it. I come from, I believe I come from, I'm descended from one of Cromwell's Ironsides, and I am a stern Protestant Puritan who believes that the taking of drugs is, and indeed of being drunk, is a throwing back in the face of God the gifts that you've been given, and indeed throwing back in the face of your parents the gifts that they've given you, and it's morally wrong. But I know that most people in this room think that's all so much flannel, so I don't expect to persuade you by it. I think I will give you perfectly good utilitarian reasons. If you give people the ability to obtain the sensation of ecstasy and reward from a drug which they take, ecstasy and reward which they ought to get from an achievement like writing a symphony or having a baby or winning a battle against an evil opponent, and then you give them this reward for nothing, then you eviscerate the moral engine of society. You give people pleasure which they have not earned, and the result is lassitude. Look at everybody goes on about 1984. It's a very fine book, but a much more frightening dystopia is Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, and that society is controlled by the drug syndrome. After which, as I say, the initial campaign for marijuana legalization was named. The drug syndrome, not merely is it a way of constantly turning people away from serious thought or discontent. It's even used to quell riots. They actually, when rioters appear, they spray it on them, and in the end all the rioters are hugging each other and kissing each other and slobbering over each other because they've been drugged into lassitude and flaccidity, which of course any despot would hope for. So I'm against it. I'm against it morally, and I'm against it practically in all cases. I have, those are my principles. And as I say, if you don't like them, I have others. I have the moral principles for those who are interested in morals, and I have the utilitarian principles for those who couldn't give a damn about morals. But both arguments are equally powerful. A society which allows the general use of psychotropic, stupefying drugs in its midst will destroy itself and will fail, and it is a one-way ticket to the third world, which we should not take. I'll say one more question, so it better be good. Are you sure?
Gentleman in the corner.
Who have really? You sure you haven't? You haven't, have you? No, it's your turn.
To think about the people I know, the people who are most concerned about taking cannabis, are those who are in professions where they're regularly tested or at threat of being tested. Do you think that in order to try and stamp out this scourge in society, having the public sector introduce such tests for people who are employed across the public sector, and tax breaks for private sector firms to do the same, not compulsion for them to do so, but incentives for them to do so, could have a serious impact on the use of cannabis?
There's something about the idea of drug testing individuals in their private lives which repels me. I think the law is concerned with what people can publicly do. The idea that by taking a certain job you allow someone to stick a needle into your arm and take out a blood sample and work out what's in your body is a bit much for me. I would much rather have a properly enforced, well understood criminal law which people obey. What I fear is that something of the kind would need to be developed in any serious profession or occupation if we did legalize marijuana. And it would, far from making us free, it would make us more surveilled and less free. And it would also it would have to be imposed on the innocent as well as the guilty. And I think that just revolts against the presumption of innocence which should be at the heart of all the activities of any government of any free country. I would like us to stay free. I don't think we'll stay free if we legalize marijuana. I think that's one of the very powerful reasons for not doing it. I just wish there were more voices on that side. And I thank you all very much.
Thank you.